My name's Tony Rimmer. I'm going to be chairing the session this afternoon. I'm proud to say that I was one of the Liverpool 47 surcharge councillors, and we've got a number of them up here on the table this afternoon. Just going to introduce, from my left you have Paul Astbury, who's one of the Liverpool 47. Dave Walsh, who was an apprentice in those days. He's moved on a bit since then. And now President of the Liverpool Trades Council. Harry Smith, one of the Liverpool 47. Maybe the next person to my right here doesn't need too many introductions. This is Audrey White. The person who spiked Starmer when he was across the road in the restaurant. And further to the end of the table is Felicity Dowling, again one of the Liverpool 47. So you may gather we've done these kind of sessions quite a few times over the last 30 odd years. I don't think we've done one for quite some time, but I'm sure we'll be able to remember things in the dark and distant past and tell the story. It's giving us our opportunity to correct one or two of the mistruths and the distortions that were said, particularly from Kinnock about redundancy notices, and I'm sure we'll come to that. But I do have some bullet points. I'm just going to run through them, and then we'll pick up where we go from there. Just before I do, you'll see some boards around the room, and if you start at that end, it's pretty much a timeline taking you to that end of the events and what was involved in those days in the 80s. So, just to give you some indication of where we're going to go with this. Overall control in 1983. Labour didn't take control of the city until 1983. It was a Tory Liberal thing before that. The District Labour Party that we had in those days and the pledge that each of the councillors made to the District Labour Party. The inheritance of a Tory Liberal budget back in 83 that we had to work with and caused us no end of problems subsequently. We increased the majority on the election in 1984. We get then into a bit of the campaign, and we delayed setting the rate in 1984 while we were talking with Jenkins, and we had Jenkins come round the city. We showed him some of the appalling housing, and without moving on to what other comrades might say, he actually said that day he didn't think that housing conditions existed in this country the like he'd seen in Liverpool that day. So that's how naive they were. The negotiations that went on, we were able to get £60 million from them, which enabled us to move into what we called the urban regeneration strategy. We dealt with some of the education problems and reorganised education. That might be something Felicity will cover. Jenkins, when he came that day, said that he was going to leave his door always open for us. That was in 85. Sorry, that was in 84. In 85, he'd been moved on. Thatcher had moved him on, and we ended up with Nicholas Ridley, and the door stayed firmly closed, which also led to our problems that we were trying to negotiate that funding that we'd done the year before. The redundancy notice is a major issue for the 47, and it's great that we can actually explain what went on there to people. I still get friends of mine come up to me and said, "You made me redundant." And I said, "No, I didn't." They've got that bit of paper that tells them that they were likely to be made redundant. I can't remember the exact wording on it, but nobody was made redundant. That was a tactic that was used, and we'll come to that. The support from the local authorities, trade unions, which is really important, and Dave will be able to come in on that. During that period, we also gave support to various other groups in the city and nationwide. Audrey, with her disputed lady at Lord John. The miners' dispute was on in 1984. That ran in parallel with our first year of our campaigning and the support that we gave to them and they gave to us. And then the dockers. Now, the dockers' dispute wasn't until the 90s, but we'll come to how we helped them as well. The support of the Liverpool people was outstanding. The legacy that we've got, and then at that time there were 31,000 people employed by Liverpool City Council. I believe it's maybe less than 6,000 now, and we didn't make any of them redundant, so we'll come on to that as well. So, going back to the first bullet point, which is overall control in 1983. Does anybody want to come in on that one?
I'll come in a little.
Paul?
It's to give a background.
Oh, you may need to use this for the broadcast.
We always need to qualify it, and as Tony's pointed out on the billboards, we can get an understanding of what the city was like in the 80s. The one thing I do want to mention is Tony Mullane's book, and Dave's got copies here of it. I think people should read it, because it goes into the industrial decline of Liverpool in and around that time, from the 70s and leading up to 1983. And that in itself is a discussion and a lead-off, but needless to say, we can qualify it with this. There was 120,000 jobs lost in Liverpool and the surrounding area between 1979 and 1983. We saw places like Meccano going, which had been around forever and a day. Tate and Lyle, the docks were coming to containerisation, they were shelling jobs. United Biscuits, Crawford's, Plessy's, all these big companies were exiting out of the city and making people redundant. And we inherited a budget. Well, one other figure that always astounds me, actually, because at the time UB40 released that record, I am a 1 in 10, if people remember it and what have you. In Liverpool, it was 1 in 5 were unemployed. 88,000 people in Liverpool were unemployed as a result of what had took place in the period that I've just mentioned. We inherited a budget from the Liberal Party, which asked us to make 3% of our workforce unemployed. We, me as a building worker, Ari as a building worker, and other people, Paul Lafferty on the dock as a building worker, we felt that given the circumstances, was absolutely abhorrent. And that, quite honestly, we weren't going to do it. Under any circumstances, were we going to add to 88,000 people unemployed, families. I remember the Needham family that lived round the corner from me, all worked in Dunlops. 3 members of that family got wiped out, job-wise. The main breadwinner and 2 of the sons. That went right through our estate, the estate that I lived in the Chilwell Valley. Most of the people on our estate worked in either Fords, Standard Triumph, Meccano, or indeed, where did I just say then?
Dunlop.
Or Dunlops. So you can imagine the carnage on Chilwell Valley. I mean, you were talking to an estate that was relatively happy. We had football teams, we had everything going, people were putting in, and there was a lot of things happening. There was a great community spirit, and that ended when those jobs went. There was no longer the money available, if you like, from people that had previously gone, yeah, I'll throw that in, let's get a kit, let's get the lads out. Unfortunately, we should have also been saying, let's get the girls into those kids as well and get them playing football. But times have changed for the better, fortunately. But nevertheless, 88,000 people unemployed. We weren't prepared to make that worse. We weren't prepared to add to that, so we weren't prepared to make that 3% of the council workforce redundant, and we never ever did. There was 31,000 people employed when we took over, and when we left office, surcharge in 1987, there was 31,000 people employed then. Other people can go into the questions that Tony's actually raised. But we were also in a position, not only did we inherit that budget equally with £10 million worth of unallocated cuts, to actually do that on top of everything else I just described would have been wrong. By the time, we'd also lost 120 million in rate support grants. The council had took off 120 million pounds rate support grants by the government. By 1986, actually, that figure had gone up to 285 million. That's money that it could have been used to employ people. Given all those circumstances and given that background, given the fact that there was also 22,000 people on the housing waiting list trying to get a home or living in substandard housing, the deck access flats in Netherley, Belvale, the tenements in and around the city. There was that demand, the demand for people to be housed, and yet the government would still cut 150 million by 1986 in the housing improvement programme. It was called HIP. It was a grant. It was to give you the ability to go out and borrow money to, if you like, do some building. They took 150 million pound off Liverpool, knowing that Jenkins had been there and described it as the worst housing conditions he'd seen in Western Europe. Now, how can you turn round and say that the councillors in those circumstances were simply looking for trouble, simply going out of their way to be awkward, which was suggested by a lot of people, including those within, sadly, the Labour Party? Kinnock bears one of those names. But Baker also bears needs to be dealt with as the Environment Secretary. During the period of 1986, he was asked a question. Surprisingly, it was asked by Dale Campbell-Savers. It was never really associated with being on the left, but there was a debate going on about Liverpool during that period. And he made the point that Liverpool's problem could, in fact, be solved. That the government, in cutting its capital transfer tax by £12,000 million it had gained, that by Liverpool asking for 25 million, it was nothing to go and give them that money to alleviate the problems that had been described by Jenkins and were being described by the council at that time. And Baker replied, it's not about the money. It's not about the money. It's about the issue and whether we deal with these people because they're undermining our position. That's what they said. That's what they were about. They were about smashing Liverpool as an example, and we refused to be smashed. And when we left, we built 5,000 homes. We had them built, they were there, and people were living in. The quality of life for them was improved. We demolished the tenements that had been declared unfit for human habitation. We'd knocked down 5,000 flats in Netherley, and if you went to Netherley now and looked at Netherley, you'd go, what a nice estate. What a pleasure it is to walk around here. People want to go and live there. Where the DAC access flats that were built in the 70s, they didn't want to live there because of the inconvenience of living in them and the circumstances that people were in when they did live in them. They couldn't get lifts working, the garbage and everything else was difficult to get rid of because of the bulk bins and everything else, all the issues that go along with living in DAC access flats. We built houses. We converted near enough 5,000 masonettes and flats. We chopped them down and we made them into houses. And you can go around Nailersfield, which is where I used to live, living around there, and you can look at what we did with those masonettes. We made them into 3 and 4 bedroom houses. We built bungalows for pensioners so they could give up a 4-bedroom house and not get put on the 14th floor of a block of flats. They felt comfortable in terms of moving from a home to give a home to a family to moving to a bungalow where they felt comfortable and safe. We built in cul-de-sacs so people would have a community around them where they could talk to each other and deal with the daily issues of life. We did a lot of things, comrades, a lot of things that we should be, I'm not saying thanked for, but we should be realised that what we did improved our lives for an awful lot of people. And when we come to talking about what was achieved, then I would say this. We built more houses between 83 and 87 than the whole of England and Wales, and I think probably Scotland as well, put together. And that sums up the 47. They were men and women who went out in the interests of working class people and changed their lives for them.
Thanks, Paul. We'll come to some of those points that Paul's referred to there as well a little bit later and maybe expand on one or two things. One thing that I tried to find, I had all these boards up last night at home trying to put them in a timeline order, and I couldn't see, it might be there in some of the small print, but I couldn't see some emotive words that affected us at the time. And it was a thing that was in a letter from, I don't know, it was Patrick Jenkins to Thatcher, about the managed decline of the Liverpool economy. Jeffrey Howe, well done, yeah. So we weren't going to sit back and let that happen. And, you know, as we'll come to, you know, we had some great support from the people of Liverpool in that campaign. One of the other things that I mentioned earlier was one of the reasons why we did what we did was in those days you had a thing called the District Labour Party. You don't have it anymore. I'm not sure whether it was Kinnock or Blair got rid of them. But when you went to the local government panel to be interviewed as to whether you were suitable to be a councillor or not, one of the questions they asked you was, who do you believe to be the policy-making body for Liverpool City Council, or the Labour group on Liverpool City Council? And if you didn't say the District Labour Party, you didn't get on that panel. So it was a pledge that we gave, and that was what I think bound us all together, that we'd given that pledge effectively to the people of Liverpool. Unfortunately, we don't have a District Labour Party anymore, and maybe we'll come to what you've got now, and now they select their candidates now a little bit later. One of the other things, does anybody want to come in on the inheritance and the effects that it had of us inheriting that Tory Liberal budget? It was a cut budget that when we took control back in '83, we had to sort of live with a cut budget, which was what we were totally against, you know, but it was already set for us. Felicity.
Can I go back to the District Labour Party for a minute?
Of course, yeah.
Oh yeah, stand up, it's okay. It's all right, I'll stand up with it. Right, for my sins, I was secretary of the District Labour Party. Before I took the office on, it was a paid role by the Labour Party, and they kept promising that they would make it again into an official role, but during all the council campaign, I was secretary of the District Labour Party. Now, I think the things that I think still come from that is that, first of all, that having members of the Labour Party really mattered. Recruiting people to the Labour Party was an important part of anything we did. So it was building the depth of the involvement in the wards. But then the wards would send representatives to the District Labour Party. So like I lived in Anfield, and I was a delegate from Anfield ward to the District Labour Party. And the District Labour Party made policy. Now, that wasn't done by a random, resolution at a meeting. We had working parties working on serious issues before we thought we'd take power. This was done 82, 83, before we actually took power. One of them was about urban regeneration, how we were going to turn not just the housing, but the living conditions in the worst areas of the city into something that was actually pleasant to live in. And we agreed 16 areas that we would work on, and we had plans for those 16 areas in files ready to go before we actually took power. So when you're sitting working at the moment on some policy or other, don't think it won't come to anything. If you've done the work beforehand, it can come to something. Now, my part in that was, and I'll talk, if Tony lets me in again, I'll talk again about what happened in education. But my part was planning and working on the working parties and the policy documents for education. The other thing that really mattered was that we were very, very involved. We wanted everybody who could be involved to be involved in the discussions and in the decisions that we were taking in the District Labour Party. And occasionally we would have, well, fairly regularly, but not like every meeting, there would be open meetings, so anyone who was a Labour Party member could come. Now, Kinnock and Co. in his report thought it was disgusting that some working men turned up in their workers' uniforms. We actually had workers there in uniform. That was very threatening. But those open meetings were really important, and there was, you can imagine, ferocious debate there. It wasn't all, softly, softly. There was really big debate there. And it meant that we had really deep connections to not just to the communities, but to the workplaces. And we would have meetings with, obviously we work very closely with the Trades Council, and which is the trade union, where all the trade unions gather, and with the dockers. And we would make sure that we were talking to the different workplaces and the Labour Party Young Socialists. And honestly, we could not have done what we did without those gangs of youngsters who would go and work their cotton socks off. They would go and leaflet around the factories, get in and speak to the shop stewards committees. I wish to God we could get the health campaign into the shop stewards committees and the factories like we could do then. Okay, sorry. So we had very deep connections to the communities and really active ongoing democracy. Those things mattered. When it came to the miners' strike, it started off with it was Tony Byrne who actually started it, wasn't it? We went down into the city centre with buckets and to collect for the miners, and came back to our house, and it was like piles of coins in buckets that we were having to sort and take to the bank. But eventually it became that the miners themselves came and did the collections, and every one of them had to have a permit with my signature on it to be able to do that. And we collected so much. I mean, my ward, the ward I represented, was Speak, and we collected every Saturday for the miners, and we didn't collect money, we collected food, and we sent carloads of food down to Point of Ayre Pit every week. It was a really important, and the Point of Ayre Pit were with us. Does that sound better? No. And the final point I'd written down I wanted to make about the District Labour Party.
Was this one, but this is shorter. Can you maybe stand here? I'm sorry. I'll come down.
The final point I wanted to make was when the councillors actually were threatened with surcharge, it meant the possibility was that you'd lose your house, you'd lose your car. For people who had professional qualifications, it meant the possibility of being barred. So it was scary. So we made a point of getting all of the families together and holding the family support group and holding meetings with the families and discussing with them what to do and how we were going to manage that situation. Now, we'll talk about what actually did happen later on, but it was really important that the families of the councillors were also involved. And that wasn't just, spouses. It was mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, everyone who was involved in the families was involved in those campaigns. So the District Labour Party really was the organising hub and very, very central to the campaign and to getting the people of Liverpool to feel that this was their campaign and that this involved in, and the level of political involvement, I think, is often described in the fact that there would be discussions on the bus about how did the vote in that union branch go, what's happening with this, and literally one bus driver, someone saying to the driver, "Hey, drive, what did happen on the Nalgo vote?" And it was expected that the bus driver he'd know as to what was going on. So, I mean, I just want to have that picture of a very vibrant District Labour Party with links into the communities, links into the workplaces, because the trade unions would send delegates as well, links into the trade unions as an organiser of what became a mass campaign. And that concept that democracy is essential to run a mass campaign is the main lesson, I think, from the District Labour Party. And I've got here the copies, and don't anyone dare steal them. I've got copies of the newspapers we put out door to door. We called it Not the Echo, and we put them out door to door with manpower, with the members giving it out, and we didn't pay for them to be given out, to make sure that everybody knew what was going on in the city about the key issues. So, have a look at them by all means, and we'll try and get them sort of republished in some way so people can see them better. But that idea of keeping everybody involved is a really important part of what happened through the District Labour Party. Of course, I was expelled for doing that.
Thanks, Fliss. Just one of the 2 points that have gone through my mind while we've been talking. One of the comrades of the 47, Tony Byrne, I can remember Tony saying that if we hadn't had all the money taken from us in the cuts from the Tory government, we could have given the people of Liverpool a rate-free year. So that's what they were doing to us. They were taking that money away. That if we'd have been able to, have that, the things we could have done with it more than we actually did, but give people a rate-free year and still do the programme of work that we'd taken on board. On the business, I think we'll move into now in the fact that you'll see on the banner behind us, better to break the law than break the poor. That was something we nicked from the Poplar Councillors back in the 1920s, I think. 1921. I don't know that we actually did break the law effectively. We'll come on to the reasons why we were surcharged. But in those days, what we did while we were trying to negotiate the funding with Jenkins, as I say, we took him around the city. He made that comment that he'd seen housing conditions he never thought existed. I actually remember one of the places that we went to. I wasn't able to go round on the bus with them, but I went round in my car just to see what was going on. And I'd actually done a site visit to one of these places where we went to. Now, bear in mind, this was May. It was quite a warm May. It was scorching hot the day we took Jenkins around. We went to a house in Everton, round the Spell Lane area, and they had an outdoor toilet, and the system was broken. And there was basically an iceberg going from their outdoor toilet into the rear entry. This was May. So that's how bad the conditions were. And I think as a Tory, he was completely shocked. One other story about that day that I heard, we went back to the town hall, and they're all standing around having cups of tea and sandwiches and all talking along very nicely. And you'll see on some of the posters around the room, some of you may remember him, John Hamilton. John Hamilton always wore a suit and tie, overcoat, trilby hat. Now, somebody said to Jenkins, "What are you doing this weekend, Patrick?" And he said, "Oh, I'm off to the farm." So he was a gentleman farmer of a weekend. And he turned to John Hamilton and said, "Do you farm, John?" And John Hamilton lived in a 2 up, 2 down in Anfield, but that was their concept of reality, that they thought John was a bloody farmer, Paul, come back in? Or?
Yeah, you see, it's also about the relevance of today, because although it happened in the 80s, it's now, I was 30 when I got surcharged. I'm 66 now. It's 30 odd years ago. We forget how long ago it was. But people still talk about it. We still talk about Poplar. There's a lot of good programs or documentaries on YouTube now about Poplar being produced by, there's one woman there from the East End, and I was watching it, in fact, a couple of nights ago, and it was a brilliant documentary, what she did, explaining the whole situation and why the Poplar councillors refused to increase the rate on people that already were hard-pressed, and that's a lead-off in itself. But one of the things which we've got to look at is raising the question and having discussions on Poplar, on Claycross. We forget Claycross at times, as well as Liverpool, because I tell you what, it's not like it's going to end in Liverpool. Look what's going to happen now in the next year. They've borrowed 170 billion, or it's between 150 and 170 billion, supposedly giving it now to the gas companies, and they're still going to give us record gas prices, by the way, as well. But where are they going to get that money from? Who are they going to come to? It'll be the councils. Because the Tories always look at councils like it's some sort of milk cow. It's something you go to when you want to raise money. And they don't give a damn about how many cuts have been made over the period, they are going to go back there and they're going to demand more. I even watched, or I read an article in the Echo, which was some while ago now, where even Joe Anderson was saying in the Echo, what is it? We've made over £400 million worth of cuts over the period that I've been in office. He said, and they're still demanding more. He said, what is it? Did you want us to do what the councillors did in the 80s? Did you want us to move down the road of deficit budgeting? Because that question will be asked of councillors in the future. Now, where are you going? You've cut everything. It's not about turning lights off. It's coming to the point where it's life and death. And even Joe Anderson admitted that in another discussion. He said, look, I can't guarantee now that the cuts we're making are not going to affect living conditions so badly in Liverpool that people may have a fatality because of it. He was expressing where he was going, where he was coming from. And albeit they made those cuts, it's still, for some people, a case of saying, I'm reaching a point where I can't carry on this way. But you have a Labour leadership that's saying, well, we think you should. We've got to raise it in the trade unions again. We have to raise it in the trade unions, whether it's okay to just carry on making the level of cuts that haven't just been made over the last 12 years, but have been going on for, well, 36 years. People can't afford it anymore. It's time we made a stand. It's something we've got to do. The 80s is as relevant today as what it was in 1983 when we took control. We're all trade unionists. We've all got to go back to the trade union movement and say it's not enough to tell our councillors to go and do it. We've got to start standing up now and saying enough's enough. We started that campaign. We've had the demonstration. Let's go back to the unions now and let's campaign for jobs and services.
Strangely enough, that wording, enough's enough, was what I used on my election address back in 1984. We've been saying it that long, enough's enough, and where we still are again now. Maybe we should have took a copyright on it, I don't know, but copyright on it. Harry, would you like to contribute?
Yeah. I'm Harry Smith. I'm, of course, one of the 47. One of the things I always like to quote when I'm at a meeting like this is when we took control in 1983, one of the first things Neil Kinnock said, the time's not right. Now, I was 33 then, I'm now 73, and I'm still waiting for Neil to phone me up and tell me that the time's right to have a go. And Tony mentioned that Kinnock said the door's always open. He forgot to mention it was a trapdoor. Yeah. I think one of the things you've got to realise is, when we took control in 83, it didn't just happen by magic. There was a lot of work, probably from the 60s, where people were sorting the District Labour Party out, getting people to give an undertaking that if they were elected, they'd carry out the policies, you know, of the district party. And one of the things that you've got to realise is, the reason we won seats, we won Melrose and Abercrombie and others, that were Liberal and Tory seats. And we won them by people coming out and voting Labour. Reg Flood was the leader of the Tory party in Liverpool. And he doubled his vote in Melrose, but he got swamped by Labour voters. Warbrek, yeah. He got swamped by the Labour vote voting for Jimmy Hackett, and that happened all around the city. And even though the Echo and leaders in the Labour Party were slagging us off, every time we went to the electorate, we increased our vote. And the difference was people could see the houses, they could see the jobs, they could see the nurseries, the schools, and everything else that was there. And one of the things, if you're ever in a position where you go to your MP or councillors and ask them for facilities and laws to be changed on access to things, and they'll tell you, well, it'll take about 3 years, that. We actually sold our mortgages to the French bank, and we still kept full control of everything. We just got the money for the mortgages. And we knew that once the government seen us do it, it'd cause a problem. So we waited till I think it was 5:30 on Friday night, and we signed up for it. By 8 o'clock Monday morning, that was illegal. And what we had all councils, Tory, Liberal, Labour councils, phoning us up to say how to do it. Well, it was illegal. So if anyone tells you it takes forever, just say, well, use the same system you used, to stuff Liverpool. And one of the other things which we're grateful for, I used to go around the country talking at meetings, and my brother, and he still does, my brother lives in Nottingham. So I'd go down to Nottingham to speak at the NUM, which we all know, they had their scab union. Well, there was a handful of people who were in control of the NUM money. So we did quite well out of that sort of thing. And what we've got to look at is going back to the unions and talking about creating a workers' party. Because what's happening now, singing God Save the Queen, in front of Union Jacks, I'm afraid that's not something that I would want to do. The other thing is with the voting, we got, we're still speaking to universities who look at the spike in Liverpool in the 80s, where everywhere else the Labour vote was going down. If Neil Kinnock would have got the swing to Labour that we got, he would have been Prime Minister for 2 elections. But of course, he was as popular as, in a spacesuit. So there's one thing that, when you're on the council, all he seems to be doing now is looking for things to cut, where we were looking for other things. Felicity was doing a lot in education, and one of the things, and it may not seem much to some people, but when you were getting school meals, if you were on free school meals, you got one coloured ticket, and if you were paying, you got another coloured ticket. And the kids who were paying would get served first, and the kids who were on free school meals would have to wait, basically, to see what was left. So immediately we got in, we did that in. It was just one ticket for everyone. And when we asked the people who were doing this, why do you have that? Well, we need to know who's on free meals. You know who's on free meals. You don't need the tickets, And the other thing what happened was, if you were on free school meals, you'd get a chitty to get, school clothes, like a duffel coat and a pair of shoes. There was no choice. You just got the duffel coat with a red lining in the hood and a pair of shoes. Now, if you were in a lot of schools, everyone had a duffel coat and a pair of these shoes, so it didn't really matter. But in other schools, it did. Those kids were singled out as being on free coats and all that. And we all know how kids can be cruel. And one of the things that Felicity did, she got a buyer in, and he bought up the end of lines, all top brands. And you used to have to go to Kent Street, where the fire brigade and bin men go for their overalls. You'd have to take your kids and get in these queues. And what we did, we opened a shop up and had a till. There was no money, but you'd go to the till and bang the till. And the kids could pick a number of different styles of shoes, different coats, jackets, trousers, whatever they were getting. And they could go and pick. So everyone didn't walk into school all looking the same. And as I say, some schools it didn't matter because everyone had a duffel coat with a red hood. But in other schools it was, it was treating people badly. And one thing I always remember, Jenkins, when we got the money out of him and wound him up, he said, "We're going to dance. I'm going to dance on your graves." We all went home and changed our wills to be buried at sea.
Thanks, Harry. I don't know where to follow from that. We're only halfway, we're not even halfway through the bullet points yet. we could be, I think we're supposed to finish, or it's scheduled to finish at 4, but I think we're going to nick a bit of extra time on that one because we started late. But right, I'm going to bring Audrey in because she sat very quietly, and which isn't like Audrey, yeah. But you might have to be patient with her because she's been speaking and shouting that much, particularly yesterday at the Dockers. And there was a new chant that the Dockers came up with yesterday. I won't go into that. Maybe we'll do it a bit later. But she's lost her voice a little bit, so she's trying to whisper as best as she can. So I'll just bring Audrey in now and...
I'll stand up. I think really what we have to say is that I'm here talking about my dispute as a backdrop to what was happening with the councillors at that particular time. And I have to say that the lessons, or if you like, the same conditions that existed for the councillors obviously existed at the same time in Liverpool during my dispute. And we won for the same reasons as well. And I think a lot of people have to learn today that these things don't drop out the sky. You know, I'm very proud that me and my husband organised that plaque for the 47 councillors. It was a political decision to do that, to raise the whole question of the heroic stand that the 47 council did, but, you know, the very practical things that they brought to this city, the gains they made for working class people, and for the stand that they stood, you know, for the stands they took, at risk to themselves and possibly their own futures. And, you know, it's the same thing people talk about me as being brave, because, you know, I was being sued for £250,000 and my family was, and so on. But all I'd say is that rather than saying we were brave, was that we had, you would only do something like that when you've got masses of workers behind you. And the only way to get into that position, because we wouldn't ask anyone to do it now on their own and just go off and, here, we want you councillors to stand up and say blah, blah, blah. No, what we want is a campaign, a grassroots campaign of ordinary people. You do the work, you put the work in, you be consistent, and you lay the ground for victory. And that's what happened with the 47. They know more about it than I do. But I do know with my dispute, it was 100% the same. I mean, it's not heralded very much, but, you know, we organised at the end of every day, and this was 6 days a week, because the shop was open 6 days a week, and it went on all day long. And after that, we would have a meeting every night, and we'd be careful not to have a meeting in a pub, because somebody would be photographing us going into the pub. We always used to refuse being interviewed in the pub. So we'd have a meeting afterwards and we'd discuss what we'd learned. We really did. I'd say nearly every day. And we would make sure everybody was on that picket line knew that you don't go on the ale and turn up outside a woman's fashion store and try and start telling them what happened. You don't go and have a drink. You don't swear. And you know the story. The main thing was that they all knew the story of what had happened to me and what had happened to those girls, and that you discuss and you talk to them. We had a petition for that. And that happened, you know, all day long with all of us, from dockers to car workers to people from the unemployed centre. And it meant that there wasn't a person in Liverpool that didn't come along. We were lucky it was in the city centre. That didn't come along and not know the true story, because even then you couldn't rely on the echo for getting across what was really going on. So I just think that it's if we're looking at lessons, that's what we have to do. And when we were arrested, I wasn't arrested, but 7 people were arrested on that picket line. And they had to go to court. My husband was one of them. They had to go to court. And of course, there was 2 policemen involved. Can you imagine what the magistrates was like when they were being questioned, while the pickets were being questioned? They tried their best to make them all trip up, where were you stood at this time? And so many minutes later, where was she stood? And all this. And it was absolutely, they put the time in to cross-examine them and cross-examine them. And there was 2 policemen. But because we were disciplined and we had meetings beforehand and we talked through where we were and what was happening and how important it was for us to win this, we actually had 7 pickets stick to the same story, while 2 policemen, 2 thick plods, couldn't get a story together between the 2 of them. So, you know, and the importance of it is that for the first time in trade union history, the police had to pay costs to a trade union. And it was absolutely tremendous for those pickets, some of them out of work, well, I think most of them were out of work, to be honest with you, that they were just absolutely threw everything up in the air when they won that victory. And it was another part of how we as a city were politicised over a period of time through, you know, the construction workers' strikes in the 70s, right through to car workers and right through to the whole politicisation through class struggle and the political education through people within the movement planning and organising and building. And you only get victories when you work hard. It doesn't happen overnight. And my dispute was going on during the election period for Terry Fields. So we'd have people running in for an hour and saying, I've got to go off Audrey, we've got to get Terry in. You know, and I'd be going, yeah, bloody hell, yeah, get off. So it was just absolutely a hectic period of time. And yet everyone was so committed because so much was at stake. And I'll tell you, my staff, the girls who worked for me, they were on such crap wages. You know, they were actually below the minimum wage then. And they had them running round to get commission, putting pressure on them to sell the frocks, their expensive frocks. A lot of people were coming in with provident checks because they didn't have any money. And they were on commission to get what they were legally entitled to anyway. And there was so many people on a weekly or daily basis writing in letters, hanging around the store, wanting to speak to the manageress. So I was the manageress. And you know what? They wouldn't even give me the price of a stamp to answer any of those girls. They wouldn't even give me the price of a stamp. It was discussed in that company, a massive company, 350 shops all around the country for the men, and somewhere around the same for the women. So they weren't a small little piddling shop, but they absolutely treated workers with contempt, and they treated them girls, that's why they were sexually harassed, because those girls were nothing to the employer, and they wouldn't even let me, you know, treat them. Well, I refused to. That's why I was sacked, obviously. But, you know, they wanted me to go along with the bad treatment that those women had. And it was a tremendous win for the women of this, of our trade unionism. It was just a tremendous win for women generally. And obviously, you know, that campaign went on to change the law on sexual harassment. But when you've got, the point I want to make is, when you've got people behind you and you feel the confidence of the solidarity, real solidarity within the city, you don't look at the consequences. You know, you can't afford to, because you wouldn't even go on strike once if you started to think about the consequences. How would you feed your family? I might be made I might be made homeless because I can't pay the rent or whatever it is. So you can only have the bravery and the confidence to go forward if you've done the work and you've got people behind you and you know you're in the right, and then you stop at nothing. We broke the law. If you're not sure whether you broke the law or not, we really did break the law. We did. We signed at the High Court for £250,000, and we said we would continue we would not break the law. And when we came back, got on the picket line straight away, and once we did that, we were secondary picketing. And every one of them people stood there. But I'll tell you something now, the union, although I herald the union, the full-timer at the time said, I haven't seen this, and walked off. It's actually in the film, actually. Somebody says, he looks the colour of boiled shite. And that's because he did. Because he was worried that after we'd signed that the union would have £250,000 taken off them. And of course, that didn't happen. And I think it was because the movement was so strong and so much behind that particular dispute, me as one woman, that they daren't use the secondary picketing laws on us, that they daren't implement that £250,000. They'd have had a job getting £250,000 off me, because I absolutely had not a meg to me name. So that's all I've got to say, really. And just to also add that it was a political city then, and I think it's getting to be a real political city now, and hopefully the work will be done within the movement and we will move forward on similar lines. I hope so.
Yeah. Just on the point that Audrey made there about us being sure whether or not we broke the law, we didn't break the law, although it said that on our banner. What we did in the first year that we delayed setting the rate, which was 1984, we took advice from the city treasurer, the city solicitor, as to, how we stayed within the law. The only stipulation that we were given at that time was that we had to give the ratepayers of the city 10 equal monthly instalments. So where you would normally set the rate in the March, at the March meeting, that was your budget meeting, we delayed and we didn't set the rate until the May. Within that 2-month period, that was while we were negotiating with Jenkin for more money for a return of some of the funds that were taken from us. And we got 60 million in the end, like I said earlier, which allowed us to go ahead into our programme of works that we wanted to do, and with regard to housing, and also the reorganisation of education and sports centres and parks and stuff. So that's important to bear that in mind. We normally set the rate in the March, and we didn't set it until the May. No action was taken against us that year, and we'll come on to when it was taken against us, obviously. I think Paul wants to just come in.
Well, it's a very important issue, and obviously people want to hear about it and talk about it, and Dave wants to contribute because he was a worker at that particular time as a young apprentice, and obviously people are looking at the campaign and want it to be successful. I mean, people forget sometimes the media campaign that we were up against, the fact that the echelons of the Labour leadership at the time were criticising us for the position that we were taking. And in 85, which is the period that Tony's talking about, when we delayed setting the rates, and we forget sometimes there's 22 local authorities that come together in those period where we were all campaigning against what was going on, against the cuts, against rate capping, and asking for money to be given back to be used properly in the interests of people that all these boroughs ultimately represented. But at the end of the day, and Dave can talk about it, Ridley, Baker, they refused to talk to Liverpool. I don't know about anyone else, but they certainly refused and wouldn't have anything to do with us. There was countless questions asked in Parliament. Sometimes we forget, actually, about the role Eric Effer played. Eric Effer was brilliant. You read Hansard, and what Eric Effer was arguing, he argued so hard for Liverpool. It was unbelievable. Terry Fields, Pat Wall, Dave Nellis, Eddie Lloyd, and all the MPs in Liverpool at that time played a positive role. That whenever somebody got up and criticised us, they would go in and ask questions. In fact, I said earlier about Campbell Savers. I want to just get that right. The government didn't recoup £12,000 million. What Campbell Savers said was, you've given £12,000 million by the tax laws you've changed to your mates, and you cannot give £25 million to Liverpool City Council to fix all the problems you recognise are awful and deplorable, and yet you still won't sit down with them and help them. How disgraceful is that? So it was even reaching some elements, the campaign, of what we would have traditionally called Campbell Savers as being, at that stage, on the right. But even he saw there was some value in what we were arguing. Even Cunningham, in some of the Hansard statements, was prepared to argue about the money that had been stopped from Liverpool and what they could actually do with it in terms of improving people's lives. That campaign reached a conclusion, and Tony goes into it in the book, and it does need to be read, where it went to a vote of the council workforce, and we lost that vote. I think it was something like 40, I'm not sure, Tony mentions it in the book, it was something like 47, 4 and 53 again, something around those regions. But we lost it. And we were faced with, and Tony Byrne was faced with, and I had discussions with Tony of, well, where do we go? Where do we go from here? We've made commitments. We've made commitments to build homes, to create jobs, to keep people employed. Where do we go? And he went, I'm working on it, we'll talk about it. And I talked at length with Tony. And in the end, he came back. I know we had discussions with the Labour group. I'm just talking from a personal level here. He said, basically, we've got to make an illegal budget legal. We passed a deficit budget with the 9%. It was insufficient for the expenditure that we pointed out at that time. The Treasurer said it's an illegal budget. So what Tony came back with was saying, we're not going to make anyone redundant. We're going to maintain the building programme, but we'll have to look at other ways of funding it. And that's where we went and borrowed £30 million. And when you look at what we borrowed compared to what the Tories are going to borrow and what they're going to do, they're going to give it to gas companies. They're not even going to give it to us to pay your gas bill. They're going to give it to the gas companies. 150 to 170 billion pounds. What could you do with that? You could create a whole new world, couldn't you, in terms of what we could do. You look at Ukraine, that should be discussed as well. That should be raised. The amount of money that's going into Ukraine, it was on one of the podcasts, Jimmy Dore, I think, an American, he's saying we're ploughing $53 billion into Ukraine for war. We could solve the homeless problem in the United States with it. And yet we find the money for war, but we can't find the money for homelessness. How deplorable is that? So yes, we did borrow money. And we went to the trade unions saying, we've got to make an illegal budget legal. And this is how we're going to do it. It's not a way we want to do it, but we're not going to make anyone redundant. And we said that. We met the Joint Shop Stewards Committee. We met Nalgo and everyone. And we said, this is a tactic. And we knew it. We were going to get it worked up us. We knew that. Because it's our Achilles heel. And we admit it. And we're not scared to admit it. But the reality of life was we did go out and we borrowed that money. And there it is. Vinnie Brown was there standing on that. He got a house out of those tenements because we borrowed that money. Along with 5,000 other people. It was money well spent. Money well spent. We kept 31,000 people employed in a city with 88,000 people who were unemployed. It was money well spent. I make no apology for it. I wish we could have done it a different way. I wish we could have, because that's the only thing they can get us on. That's the only thing they can criticise, and that's what they say. Don't make a stand, because at the end of the day, this will happen and that will happen. As Felicity said, we were all concerned. We were all worried about whether or not it would come across in a correct and proper fashion. But at the end of the day, when we went and we left office in March 1987, There's 31,000 people employed, there's 5,000 houses built, and there's 5,000 houses unfit for human occupation knocked down and gone, and some of them altered from masonettes to houses, as I said earlier. It was a good council. It was a good council, and it was worthy of the support of Neil Kinnock, not the criticism of him. And when we go forward into the future, and we're talking to people, and we meet people, don't be afraid. It doesn't go in a straight line. It goes and it swerves all over the place. But if your intentions are good, you can come out of it the other end, and you can benefit people's lives. Dave.
Thanks, Paul. Can you, is this one working? Yeah?
Right, so.
Right, okay. Just on that business of the redundancy notices, I mean, comrades on the top table, we've all got our own different memories going back those 30 or 40 years. But I seem to remember something being said at the time that had we not sent those redundancy notices out, we weren't going to get money off the Public Works Loan Board. Now, that's a body that gives local authorities funding while the rates are coming in over a period. And they said that they weren't going to give us the money because we were going to go bankrupt. Now, again, taking advice from the city treasurer, city solicitor, that was, as Paul said, a tactic that was used. We sent out those redundancy notices and we went back to the Public Works Loan Board and said, we can balance the books now, we don't have any wages to pay. So they gave us the money and then we had the money to pay the wages. So the redundancy notices were never acted upon, never. And no matter what anyone says, if they still say to you, oh, well, yeah, that council made me redundant, nobody got made redundant by us, not one person. So just to go back onto our programme that we committed to do, following the visit by Jenkin, we set up a thing called an urban regeneration strategy. And we had urban regeneration areas. I think there were 22 in the city. Someone might say there were more, but there were at least 22, as Paul says, which gave us the opportunity to go into those poor housing conditions and to deal with them. And I'm glad to say I had 3 in Gilmoss. My ward was Gilmoss, But I want to now move on. If we'll come to other bits as we've got quite a bit of time left that we can stretch it as well. But it's important that we talk about the education and the reform that we did to education, and Felicity's probably pretty good to come in on that one.
Teresa, is the sound okay? Yeah, okay. Right. Okay. A funny one to start with. When we got control of the council, you can imagine the education top officials were a bit snotty, and we kept trying to tell us what to do rather than us tell them what to do. And there was one occasion when meeting with Harry, you could imagine meeting these stuffy people with Harry, and this fellow was trying to appear to be like in control and telling us what to do with a parent there. He says, if you're going to talk to us like that, I'm getting up on the table and I'm talking. And he literally climbed on the table and talked to this official. He was... It was, yeah. So you've got to have this thing the whole time. We were working to try and do things and not necessarily with the cooperation of the officers. But the things we did achieve, the population of Liverpool, especially the youth of Liverpool, had collapsed dramatically. And there were not really enough students for all the schools. But what the Liberals have been doing was closing school after school after school in the working class areas. And that came to a skidding halt when in Croxteth, the school was occupied by the parents and the sixth formers and the older students. They just went, we're not taking it. And they occupied the school and they made the issue of the school a huge issue in the city. We had a working party the District Labour Party working on what the alternatives were. And it was hard work. We went through all the stats for the number of children there were in the system, the likelihood of the number of kids in the system, and we came up with a plan for reorganisation. Under the Liberals, when a teacher left the school, because the numbers of the kids had come down, that teacher wouldn't be replaced. And we ended up with schools with no qualified maths teacher or no qualified science teacher. And that it was all done on a strict pupil-teacher ratio. And that just wasn't on. We weren't having that. It was bad for the kids and bad for everybody. So in our system, we planned what was called curriculum staffing. We worked out what the kids needed to be taught, worked it out on the basis of the number of subjects, and then how many of each of those subjects we needed qualified teachers in. So the schools, when they were the reorganised schools were reopened with curriculum staffing, we had to invent that. We invented curriculum staffing. It became common after that. Some of the head teachers who worked with us on it made it, more publicly known, but we invented curriculum staffing. We reorganised the secondary schools, and that was one of the biggest, most contentious issues in the city. Lots and lots of arguments. But strangely, some of my longest standing friends are from the people who opposed us in that time, because we really had to discuss and win them over. We opened nurseries, and in the secondary schools, we put in, at a sort of, not the head teacher, but the next level down, we put in senior teachers with responsibility for special educational needs, one for race equality, one for sex equality, and one for disabilities. The disabilities one might have been with the SEN, I've forgotten exactly, but these key issues, we had teachers in there with responsibility for those issues to make sure that happened. So it was a really big issue, what we did along with education. It wasn't perfect, but it certainly made a huge difference in the city. And then when when Croxteth Comp was taken back into the system, we asked the remedial department, the remedial advisors from the local authority to go into the school and see what needed to be done to bring those kids who'd been taught informally up to the standard as if they'd been taught formally. They came back to us and said, the kids who've been taught informally are fine. They're absolutely where they should be for their age. The kids who've just come in from primary school, who'd had all the cuts from the Liberals, are in a terrible state. We've got to put extra teachers in. We've got to have an intervention there. But it was, I think it was, Croxteth, I'm looking at Sheila, Croxteth Comp was a huge struggle and a really important struggle for what we were able later to achieve in education. I'm going to jump a minute onto the not setting a rate. My understanding of it is that we were eventually surcharged, not for the budget that we passed, but for a theoretical sum of money that had we made the budget earlier, the government would have put that money, put the money into the bank at that point. And so for 2 months, we didn't get the interest on that money. There was a sum of money, the minimum amount to surcharge a councillor. They took that money and multiplied it by 49. And that was the amount we were surcharged for. So they just fitted it to surcharge us on that. And that campaign to fight that was for years. But the point that I wanted to make on this was that surcharge was paid off by a voluntary subscription where we would take no more than 50 pence a week from anybody. And we paid it off on those 50 pence standing orders. The woman from Westminster, who literally gerrymandered and was surcharged for gerrymandering, went off to Israel, and then when she came back, she negotiated a deal so she didn't have to pay off the full surcharge. But the people of Liverpool paid off it came to nearly £500,000 in the end. The people of Liverpool paid that off, and the supporters around the country. But no one gave us more than 50p a week. We would not have big donations on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Felicity. Just to let people know that the surcharge was actually £106,103.
And it just took us over the 2,000
Yeah.
limit, which got you the
Yeah.
from office.
And as Felicity said, that was because we delayed setting the rate. It wasn't illegal to delay in those days. It is now. And like I said before, bear in mind, in 1984 when we did it, we negotiated with Jenkins, we got 60 million quid. Nobody came to surcharge us then, but they then obviously realised they weren't going to fall for that one again, as they maybe it went through their minds, and they were going to come for us. And when we went back, as Jenkins had said, the door's always open. He'd been moved on, like I mentioned earlier. Nicholas Ridley was in place, and the door never opened. We were still trying to get money out of them, but the door never did open. So that's where that, had we set the rate in the March to when we actually did set the rate in the May, to stay legal and to pay those, so to allow people to pay by 10 monthly instalments, they determined that that £106,103 we caused the loss to the City of Liverpool. They declared it to be willful misconduct. We were disqualified from office and surcharged for that amount. Obviously, we made a campaign up. We got we ended up having legal costs to pay, so that's where it came up to the nearly £500,000 in the end. And I'll come to that at the end as to how we paid that off and what we actually did with the excess money that we couldn't stop people paying the money in, and we ended up with more than we needed, but there were good comrades who benefited from that, and I'll come to that at the end. So yeah, I'm just going to bring Dave in now. Dave, as I've said, we needed quite a bit of work getting done on some of this poor housing, and we needed to take the opportunity of 1 in 5 people in the city being unemployed and give them some hope and some jobs. Dave was one of those apprentices that was taken on in those days. As I said earlier, he's now president of the Liverpool Trades Council, and I bet he's got some stories to tell.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, 1983 was the year that I left school. The militant-led Labour Council had been elected in the May, and that year, I was being politicised. A lot of young people in the city were being politicised. I think it's important to remember that the country was kind of at a crossroads because Thatcher had been in for 4 years. She was, in effect, ending the social chapter. She was post-war period where the post-war Labour government had built up, a social system fit for people, working class people, was being ended by Thatcher in a sort of counter-revolution. And what the militant-led Labour Council represented in Liverpool at that time was a fight back. Alongside the miners, there was a fight back, a struggle against her efforts and the Tory party's efforts. Now, I grew up in Norris Green, which was a lovely place to live. That time, everyone's parents seemed to have good jobs. My dad worked in Fords, my mum worked in Littlewoods Pools. All my mates' parents all seemed to have good jobs up until about the mid-1970s. By the early 80s, all that had changed, and Liverpool all of a sudden was really grim place to live. And for school leavers, really tough. Most of the people I knew, young people, seemed to be leaving the city looking for opportunities. And if you were going to get a job, it was a government scheme. So Liverpool Council that year come in May and promised to start taking on apprentices. That year they took on, I think, 83 apprentices, if I remember rightly, over the period. They took on over 300 apprentices. I started in the September, and it was, and this is where I talk about, for me, how young people were being politicised. You might remember how political the city was becoming visitors to the city would say in the national press, you can't go to Liverpool and you get in the taxi and the taxi driver's talking about politics. You go to the pub, everyone's talking about politics. Well, that wasn't, you know, an accident. Wasn't just an aberration. That was being built up over many years, from the 1960s by pioneers like Peter Taff, who were building a movement within the Labour Party, because we had a party then that was democratic, that working class people could work within because it had democratic structures. And I think about, during that period as an apprentice, all of us as apprentices were lent out into the private sector for experience. So you'd go and be lent out to big private contractors. I found myself on building sites where we were building council houses. The site I was on most was in Kirkdale by Fountains Road. Those houses are still there, lovely houses, bungalows, 3-4 bedroom semis, front, back gardens, lovely set, beautifully set out, still popular areas of the city. They were the houses I worked on. And also the council were doing major projects, minor works to improve council estates with extensions, new roofs and all that. So I was working on these kind of minor works departments. My experience was that wherever I was, on any site, in any council depot, there was always a fantastic shop steward. And the shop steward was always, you know, so amazingly trained. Now, at that time, I took that for granted. I just thought shop stewards were all amazing. They were all well capable of talking about, you know, budgets, what a needs budget is, what the struggle is, what Thatcher is, what she represents. I took it for granted. I read the book, though, years later, a few years later, Liverpool, a city that dared to fight. I realised I shouldn't have took that for granted. That was part of a concerted campaign over many years to train up stewards, to explain to them and build them and widen that knowledge of the working class, what the struggle was. And those stewards were vital in that movement. As Paul says about the redundancy issue, yeah, that was a frightening time for workers. We were faced with all kinds of struggles. And I mean, they call it the struggle because it's difficult. If it wasn't difficult, we'd call it the doddle. But it's bloody difficult. And, you know, so we were being explained to by the shop stewards what these redundancy notices were about, what it meant. We were having these debates, these discussions, because we could. What was that also happening, and Felicity alluded to it, we were being mobilised. The convener who I had at that time for the T&G, John Sheridan, loved him. I had him on a pedestal. He was great. He wasn't in the militant tendency, but he was in that orbit. He supported what the Labour project was, and he had all the apprentices and others mobilised to leaflet to support the Labour councillors who were adhering to the policies that were set out by the District Labour Party. People might remember the Sensible Six, or we had another name for them. I'm not going to mention that, but yeah, and even worse. And we were getting mobilised to leaflet. I mean, it was explained to us why you're leafleting against these people, and why we were leafleting in favour of the councillors that we were supporting. We understood. And then we were encouraged and mobilised and agitated by them same shop stewards to attend public meetings where councillors were speaking. And if councillors were backing away, because they were under enormous pressure, councillors, of course they were, there were all kinds of threats they were being subjected to. And, you know, no one could blame them for being afraid. But there was all kinds of pressure from below. And when we went to meetings, there'd be rooms like this, public meetings, locally or in the city centre, and we'd all turn up, all, you know, working class people with our worky boots on, our steel toe caps, our overalls, and we'd be at these meetings, and if the councillors were backing away or reneging or wanting to not fulfil the policies, there'd be a ferocious reaction to that. Of course there would, because we were going to, what they were talking about, if they were backing away, we were going to get made redundant, we were going to get cut, the housing projects that were going to get cancelled. So of course there was a ferocious reaction to that. Now, the thing is, there were lurid headlines in the press that we were all bullies. No, that's not bullies. That's democracy. That's what democracy looks like when working class people are involved and it's their lives and their livelihoods are at stake. Then they'll get involved and they'll shout and they'll scream and they'll put their representatives under pressure to deliver on the programme that they've been elected on and not to renege and not to let them down. And that was how, and that's how it should be. Because you look at the Labour Party now and there's no way of subjecting councillors or MPs to pressure from below. That doesn't happen now. You can't remove them, you can't affect them. All the pressure that they're subjected to is from above, and they're told the policies that will be implemented, and they don't help us. We had a party then, we had the Labour Party, it was our party, and it had democratic structures, and you could work within the party, you could organise, and you could make your voice heard. That's not the case now. We need a new party now. That's what I believe. I still work for Liverpool City Council. I'm hanging on by my fingernails. It was 31,000 when I started. I think the number's about 4,500 now. I'm hanging on. I'll do my best to hang on as long as I can. There's another £50 million worth of cuts in the next 2 years. That's another 1,500 redundancies. God knows what's going to be left at the end of it. But I'll be arguing. I'm the convener, the Unite convener, and I'll be arguing within Unite that Unite should stop funding a party that is our enemy and start the process of funding a party that works for us.
Thanks, Dave. That was great. I mean, a lot of people in the room clearly agree with all that. I certainly do. I just have to say that the support that we got from the local authority trade unions was amazing, and we wouldn't have been able to do what we did without that support. I don't know. We'll be forever grateful for that trade union support. Right. I just want to mention things about the redundancy notices and you'll all remember, I was speaking with Kevin Bean when we were building up to the event today, and he said, you've got that video of Kinnock that's always going to be your problem. And I said, what video of Kinnock? I thought they'd made a documentary about him or something, but he was referring back to Kinnock on the platform at the Bournemouth Labour Conference, and our comrades at the back who were photographed around the room here. And Kinnock used the opportunity to discredit us about those redundancy notices. And when I've written Kinnock here, and it's reminded me, I used to live in the flats in Croxteth, and my mum, where the television was, my mum had a chair right next to the television. Now Thatcher would come on, and she'd probably get switched off, but whenever Kinnock come on, my mum would be punching the screen. She hated him for what he was kind of doing to the Labour movement and the lack of support that we got from him. And I'd just like, if he's tuned in and listening, I'd just like to say, we're still here. Here we are. We've still got our banner. We're still proud to march behind our banner. Nothing better than that one there. So if you ever see us around and we've got the banner, come and march with us. All right, just moving on then. I think we're about 10 minutes off our scheduled time. We've got one or two other little bits. We're going to nick a little bit of time into after 3 o'clock because I think the next session doesn't start till 4. So, oh no, I'm having signals coming from the back that maybe we shouldn't do that. But can we have a vote in favour of those who want to carry on a little bit longer? Yeah, we will. We will. Yeah, we're going to have a bit of. We're going to bring you in. Don't worry, we will do that. Just before we go off and wind everything up, we've touched on the support that Audrey and the campaign that Audrey had. But as I say, also in those days we had the miners' strike, and as Felicity mentioned earlier, we'd go along to Point of Ayr. I was appointed as the liaison from the council with Sutton Manor. And it was basically to make sure that they didn't go without anything that they needed. If they needed food, we'd try to get it for them. As it turned out, the campaign of support that they had, there was nothing, a great deal that we had to do, and I remember the first day when I was actually picketing with them at Sutton Manor, and it was always good, it was great timing, that their picket was at 7 o'clock. When the scab buses were going in, that was when they were going in for 7 o'clock. So you could get there and then get off yourself and get to work. But not until the miners dragged you into their welfare club and had a breakfast. And I always felt guilty. I felt like I was taking the food out of their mouths. But they said, you've been on the picket line, you're coming in and having a breakfast. So there was all that solidarity. And I'm getting tingly moments even now talking about it and thinking about it. And that's the kind of thing that I think we've got to build still, those tingly moments. With the dockers now, we've got dockers coming in from all around the country to show the support to the lads here at Seaforth and women at Seaforth. And I was talking to the two that came over from America. One was from Mobile, Alabama, all these American cities that are, famous with music. One was from Charleston, South Carolina. And the thought that if any container leaves this port, it ain't going to get unloaded at the other end. They'll make sure of that. That solidarity is fantastic. Now, we mentioned earlier about the funding that we were getting, and it just went on and on and on. So we'd actually paid off our surcharge, we'd paid off our legal costs, and the money kept coming in, and we tried to stop it. We didn't know how the hell we were going to stop it, and it kept building up and building up. Now, as far as I know, it may well be more. I think it was £30,000 was still left as a surplus when we'd actually paid the legal costs and the surcharge. And we didn't pay the surcharge right away. We made them wait. We were disqualified for 7 years, so we gave them it over a 7-year period. We'll have the money in our bank earning us the interest, thanks very much. And if you think about the £106,103, that was earning interest for someone. It was earning interest for the government. So where was the loss there? They could have given us that interest, and that was the money we were trying to negotiate with. But so we were forever grateful for all that support that we got from the various other people in dispute and the people of Liverpool. And if you look around some of these boards here, you'll see Church Street outside the town hall. Sorry, Castle Street outside the town hall, jam-packed with people from side to side, from the town hall, right back as far as you could see at the Victoria Monument. That was the level of support we had, and that was because we got out on the streets, we got out on the doors, knocking on doors, putting not the Liverpool Echo through doors, not every couple of months, it was every couple of weeks, and the support that we got from the people of Liverpool was fantastic. So we'll come on to the legacy. Does anyone else want to talk about the level of support? Yeah? Okay. The bit about the legacy, we can go on. We've got the houses, we've got the jobs, we've got well, education's been reformed again since, but so what we'll do, having a thought here, anybody want to come in with a contribution or a question? First hand up was Linda, and then this comrade here suggested he wanted, and then I'll come to the rest. So Linda.
Hello, Linda Sargent, MPA, Merseyside Pensioners Association. I feel I've got to mention today, before I say anything, my cousins, Jimmy Parry and Bob Parry MP, Jimmy Parry Councillor. And they're up there somewhere with the Stations of the Cross. Sorry, that. Yeah, so, yeah, and I like to think, we were there, me and my husband, he worked for City Council, we were there throughout, I was in it, and I enjoyed every minute of it, sad as it was, no way was there any redundancies, and then my husband came in, he explained to me, it was ridiculous, there was no such thing. So I'd just like to say that when the Labour fell in Liverpool at that time, they brought someone to manage. Was he from Knowsley? the new secretary, the fellow who ran it, what was his name? They brought him from Knowsley. He'd done a job on Knowsley, yeah. And they said, oh, you're very lucky to get him because he's really straightened Knowsley out. Now, he made thousands redundant there. How many redundant did he make in Liverpool?
No, after we'd gone.
Yeah.
Well,
120,000, did you say? Oh, no.
Well,
31,000.
31,000 were employed by Liverpool City Council in our day, and now it's less than 5.
Yeah, okay, so he just made thousands of people redundant and caused untold misery. Now, everyone said how clever he was, you know, all the people who were like establishment. Isn't he clever? Really lucky to get him, you know, because he's very good. All he did was make people redundant. He did nothing clever. He just sacked thousands of people. He's a disgrace, and then went to stay in his little house in the south of France. So there's that, yeah, and there's lots of things I'd like to say, but other than everything else, comrades, respect and solidarity.
Hello?
Do I have to press something? No, just speak into it.
Hello? Yeah, oh, there, you can hear me. Yeah, Stan Keeble, Labour Party Marxists. I'm expelled too.
I'm not expelled.
Oh, you're not expelled?
I just left.
Oh. Yeah, no, and October the 2nd is my 5-year time, so presumably Starmer will let me back in, but I don't think so. I was expelled actually for being a Marxist, and that's what I wanted to talk to. I've got to keep in to get in the camera. That's what I wanted to talk to these comrades about, because you were in Militant, weren't you? Not all of you, no. Okay. Militant ran the council, so historically that's how it...
Militant might have influenced the policies of the District Labour Party, which is what we was all saying.
I hope comrades will explain afterwards, then, after I've spoken about it, if you want to, but I don't want to do a talk by heckling all the time. I don't mind heckling, but no, it appears to me, I mean, we know that Militant had played a big part in it all, and the Militant thing is a Marxist organisation, supposedly, and they, I mean, it's what I wanted to ask the comrades about, because we know that Marxist organisation wants to get socialism, doesn't it? Wants to get rid of capitalism, not to win in one borough, but to win not just in the country, but in the world. And we need socialism in the world. We've got a really bad situation now with the climate trouble and the cost of living crisis, not just here, but poverty and starvation coming around the world, and war. All those questions have got to be dealt with, and we should be able to overcome that. So I know we've got to talk about the future of the left later today, but I want to ask the comrades what they thought about Peter Taft's version, because he left the Labour Party. I know some people got kicked out, some people stayed in, but Militant left, and I know that they weren't all expelled, right? The organisation went out, and then Peter said, "This is no longer a bourgeois workers' party." And this is important because Naomi Wimborne-Idrisi just got elected to the NEC, proving the fact there's lots of socialists in the Labour Party, lots of people that don't like Starmer, and the balance in conference is 60% to 40%. You know, Starmer hasn't got it all his own way, in other words. They're winning the positions, right? They can win the motions in general, even lose some, the right wing, you know, they can lose some, win some, but there's a massive part of the Labour Party is still socialist. I'm saying there's a lot to fight for. That'll do.
Thank you. Felicity, did you want to respond? I'll bring some other people in, but just Felicity wants to just respond.
On the issue of the Militant, nobody, I think I know, who was involved with the Militant is going to make any apologies for what we did, because what we did was actually really help organise. But to say that the Militant was the council or the council was the Militant, it ignores huge other swathes of left-wing opinion in the city. Heffer's politics went right back to pre-war, and a really strong independent Marxist. You've got Hughie, the chair, who was chair of the of the, what you call it, of the council for us. Long, long history of Marxism from a different tradition. Eddie Lloyden, similarly, we stood on the shoulders of giants. But yeah, we organised within the Labour Party. And we organised and fought really, really hard within the Labour Party and organised really strong political education and lots of political discussion. And I think everybody on the council would accept a description that they were socialist, they were internationalist. I mean, if you go back through all the work we did with international struggles, including and probably especially South Africa, we were what's called transformational socialists. We wanted an end of capitalism. We didn't want to reform capitalism. We wanted an end, a better world is possible. That was the political position, I think, joined everybody together in that. And Militant was part of that, but it was not some evil domineering feature that ruled it all. As to whether or not now is the time to be working in the Labour Party, I think that's really the next session. And we can go into that in real detail. But we had, and this was a really important part of what we did, we were in constant conversation with the class. We were always talking to people about what they thought, how they thought, what was happening. And we would, I think politics is our kind of politics is a conversation with the class. Like the simplest, still one of my best times in the council was when we still, the town hall was still there, still had a lot of the finery. And on one occasion when we were building the urban regeneration strategy, we invited some of the very old ladies from the tenements to come to the town hall. And they were greeted at the door with, they weren't actually good people, but they were greeted as they would have been greeted by flunkies in the past. They were taken into the Lord Mayor's parlour and given cups of tea and all the rest of it. And then they were walked around the exhibition, each with an officer, taking note of their opinions, talking about what the houses we were building should look like. And it was their opinion that said they wanted kitchens, and kitchens with tables, kitchens they could fit a table in so the family could eat in the kitchen. We were in conversation with the class the whole time. And in that sense, yes, we're very traditional. We were very traditional Marxists, if you like. But the Marxist tradition in Liverpool, Militant's a very strong part of it. I'm proud of being part of that tradition. But there was a damn sight more to it than just us.
Thanks, Fliss. Next was Tom. I can see your hands. Got Tom, Margie, Leslie and Mary.
If you look at that crowd, you'll see my face somewhere, so I was around. At that time, I worked in Mabel Fletcher Technical College, and I was a branch officer for NATFE, National Association of Teachers in Further and Higher Education, which some 17, 18 years later amalgamated with Association of University Teachers to form what today is the UCU. And Paul has mentioned about the vote, so I just want to say something about that you may be unaware of or have forgotten about. The NUT didn't refuse to take part in that vote. Felicity can tell me whether or not I'm wrong, but the secretary of the NUT was Jim Ferguson, member of the Communist Party, and they were viscerally opposed to what the council was doing and campaigned against it. So they didn't have a vote. My union did have a vote. And despite the fact that we frequently came out on events like that, they voted largely against strike action. Ian Lowes is reported to have congratulated us for having a go, but pointed out that if we hadn't had a go, then you may well have had a positive vote for strike action, and history may have been entirely different.
Thanks, Tom. Margie.
Margie Tyson, Merseyside Pension Association. I've listened to everyone talking today, and I really admire all the contributions. But what I've noticed, everyone's failed to mention the uprisings of Toxteth, what we know as Liverpool 8, not Toxteth. I grew up in Toxteth, Liverpool 8, and I didn't know anybody that went to university. Not one person went to university. When we had the uprisings, Heseltine came to Liverpool and he asked the Black Caucus of Liverpool, what's gone wrong? And one of their conversations was, we live at the university, we all live by it, but none of us are given access to it. Why is that? Anyhow, in August, I have a lot of nieces and nephews in Liverpool 8. They're not blood, but I'm family with them. And this particular niece is going to university at the moment. She's a black girl. Her mother went to university. Her grandparents went to university. And this is because of the uprisings of the 80s. I was on the bus on Sunday going to a fringe meeting, and there's a woman telling another woman about the riots of Liverpool 8. Well, when I hear about the riots of Liverpool 8, it makes my blood boil, because it wasn't a riot, it was an uprising against the police brutality. Against how we were all viewed. The police had us all as prostitutes because we lived in Liverpool 8, all thieves, vagabonds, etc. We had a lot of decent people. I'm a decent woman. Everyone in this room knows me as a decent woman, but I am not the only decent woman from Liverpool 8. We come in the thousands. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Margaret. Just to let you know that we didn't deliberately miss out the Toxteth riots, or the Toxteth uprising. Sorry, I fell into the trap. Yeah, I realised as soon as it said it. We didn't deliberately miss them out, but they were all part of what we were trying to do that certainly sent a message through to the government, and it was all part of what we were trying to do. But our years were 83, and I think Toxteth was 81, wasn't it? So, but we didn't deliberately not cover that. Leslie next, and then Mary.
Yeah, and I think, Margie, if you go down North Hill Street, as I used to be in Toxteth CAB at different times, friends round the corner, a lot of that housing was the 47 housing, and you can see it gardens front and back. I just want to go back to 1979, because when Felicity and others were talking about it, it didn't just come from nowhere. 1979, the Labour Party was in a majority and put the rates up. And it was the most depressing May election. Literally doors were slammed in your face and told, sod off, you've screwed us over, get lost, we're not voting for you. And Labour got snotted, basically, and, Lib Dem Tories were back in. And out of those experiences came the conferences that we had on housing. The Young Socialists had loads of detail work along at the District Labour Party. All those working groups came out of those sort of experiences, because obviously a lot of us said, we just can't go on like that. You just can't have the Labour Party, doing that to ordinary people in a terrible recession. And obviously, in some ways, we're back in that situation, aren't we? But some of the conditions up the road from in Walton, where me and Felicity lived in Anfield, but up the road there was a set of tenements where the shit came up through the sink. We were knocking on the doors, and in some cases, some of those doors hadn't been knocked on for years because the Labour Party members were scared to go and knock on those doors because of sectarianism and other things that had gone on. Canvassing for Eric Heffer, we went and knocked on doors that were difficult, unlike many of the Labour Party today, who don't want to go and have a conversation, don't want to go and be told, get lost, but you stand your ground and talk to people and offer them something as well. And that was what became the programme of the District Labour Party and the 47. Now, Paul mentioned Netherley, and obviously, like, me and Audrey had family in Netherley. Fortunately, didn't live in these conditions, but these relatively young blocks had gone up. You open your front door, and there was down the stairs, and there was your flat. And that was literally trapping people in. And do you know what? People were so desperate. They actually lit fires in their flat and legged it up the stairs so they'd be taken out of that flat and rehoused somewhere else. That's how bad it was. And that was one of the things of 47, got those flats down. Now, we all say as well in those days about the, you know, people getting a new house, getting somewhere decent to live. Rapid Hardware, for those of a certain generation, knew that Rapid Hardware, which was like a store where you got your paint, your wallpaper and all that stuff, expanded right down Renshaw Street, practically the whole length of Renshaw Street, bar Lewis's, because people were getting a job, getting a new house, and decorating their houses and doing them up. They were proud, and Rapid Hardware made their fortune. Now, Felicity talked about Labour Party democracy. When me and Felicity were first in Anfield Labour Party, the Labour Party meeting used to be the size of that front row, and it'd be me and Felicity arguing with pretty well everybody else, who were mainly right-wing, and some of them came round to the views if we had to do something, and the Young Socialists, the Women's Council and other people, you know, were really key in going out. And the T&G at the time actually gave some of us credentials so that we could go to any factory, and this is the days we did still have some factories left, and we still had union organisation in some of those factories, and you could go up to those factories, knock on the door and say, I want to speak to the shop stewards, we've got this credential from T&G, which is now Unite, and go and talk to the stewards and give them leaflets and all the rest of it. There's a picture there of Terry Fields. That's a school student strike, and you can see like the young people there. Now again, Dave mentioned the terrible conditions, like YTS and YOP schemes were being imposed. This was going to be the future for young people, you know, absolute pennies, and there was real anger, and there was somewhere to mobilise that anger. Now my own son, who was more interested in football and politics, but his footy team all decided, bar one, that they were going to come out on strike, and they were gutted because this other kid wasn't going to join them. But anyway, they had a discussion. In the end, I think the kid did actually come out. But that demo, the kids all turned up and just literally ran to the pier head, and we all legged it after them because they were just so fired up, and they just took over. There used to be a set of stairs and a statue by Arthur Dooley at the pier head, which was used for demos and things, long since gone after the 47, you'll notice. God knows where that is. But they literally just ran and took over and started that march and meeting themselves, and then the rest of us turned up. But you could see, there it is, no to YTS conscription, and the council was offering decent jobs for young people, including special schemes to take young black people on into the council. We had the Women's Council as well that fed into the District Labour Party about the ideas of nursery school meals and all the rest of it. But I just want to finish on 2 quick points. It isn't about walking down memory lane, although some of us have got, you know, fond memories of struggle and just repeating the same old things. The point is that, you know, there was a programme around which to mobilise, and there was a strategy to mobilise, and there was propaganda to take out and reach people, and a movement to do that. You could do that through the Labour Party at that time. That was taken away. But since then, barring a few of us having to go over the poll tax and getting expelled, well, I was expelled for voting against the poll tax, and I'm proud of that. But since then, we've had this theory of the market. We have to run the council according to the market, and look where that's got us. And these people who were telling us back in the 80s, oh, look what's happened if you've done this, telling us when we were voting against the poll tax, oh, you can't be doing that. These are the people who said, oh, you know, if you have a campaign, if you do this, you do that, you make a stand, we'll have the Tory commissioners running in the city. Well, what have we got now? What have we got now?
Thanks, Leslie. We've been handed a note. They would like to get the room ready for some interviews and the next session, so we're going to have to wind up at 25 past, so I'm only going to take one more speaker, and maybe two, because Paul's one of the 47. I've got to give him a split seat. And then we'll try and just sum up each one for a minute or so. Mary.
Thanks, Tony. I won't speak for very long, because a number of the comments I was going to make actually been made by Leslie. So just one or two little comments about my own memories, if you like, my own reminiscences of that particular time. I was being very active in the Labour Party Young Socialists, as it was then. And I can remember on one occasion leaving a district Labour Party meeting with Tony Byrne. And Tony Byrne was famous for, you know, when you see the Chancellor outside 10 Downing Street with his red box, with his budget in, and Tony used to carry his in a Tesco's carrier bag. And we were going up Smithdown Road, and there were a block of flats and a place called Smithdown Lane. And they were the most awful flats. And previously there had been an incident where, because of the high crime rate in the area, the people on the ground floor, mainly elderly people, almost barricaded their homes with bars on the windows and so on. And there had been an incident when an elderly woman who was very concerned about her house being burgled because she had been broken into previously, she was barricaded to such an extent that when a fire broke out in her flat, the fire brigade could not get access to her, and the poor soul actually died in those terrible circumstances. And that, more than anything, I think, brought home, you know, those sorts of stories bring home the actual reality of the importance of proper housing, and in particular, council housing. Now, one of the things I think that is greatly lacking in the Labour Party today, where they don't seem to understand the concept of council housing, because when they talk about social housing, that is not council housing. Council housing is provided by the local council, along with a direct works department where you have apprenticeships, where you have a future for young people, where young people are given proper conditions and proper pay and are educated into a trade. That is what council housing is actually all about. And it's sad that this particular Labour Party now does not consider council housing as being of a priority, and it is a priority. And we have this argument with our councillors here in Liverpool who say, oh, things are not like that now, you know, and they tell us very patronisingly, the Merseyside Pensioners Association, you don't understand, because of course we are a bit too, you know, where we live in the past, we don't understand what's going on in the housing market today. What we do understand is that with that policy that Thatcher had for the introduction of the right to buy, which we fought against all the time, so if you do that, you're going to lose the council houses that we have for future generations. And now we have a grotesque situation where you cannot walk down into the city centre without passing people sleeping in the streets night after night in all the shop doorways. That's as a result of Thatcher's policies, and that's what we should actually be fighting against. And I have to congratulate the members on our panel here. I think they've been tremendous. It's been an excellent afternoon, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, listening to all the old stories as well. And hopefully, for the younger generation who are here, to actually learn lessons from that, and to actually fight in the Labour Party for a proper socialist, proper social party.
Thanks, Mary. Coming close to the time, I don't know whether we can nick a couple of minutes or not, but Paul Lafferty, one of the Liverpool 47.
I'm going to be brief, actually, because I think it's so eloquent. I've really enjoyed it. I was there. I was thinking, was I there? No, I'm not sure I was. And then I realised that I actually was, and I realised some of the things that, you know, I remember, and some of the things that, you know, you think, oh yeah, I remember that happening. And I think that one of the things is important as well, is about, it was the broad left. And I think that it was like, can we say, a perfect storm. You had the broad left, becoming politicised, the unions becoming politicised. You've got the militant pushing and getting the ideal. So you had this huge force that actually met and said, let's do something about it. And then when we said with the council, well, that's what we want to do. We mightn't be here for long because no mistake, we knew that Thatcher would get us at some stage. I mean, we weren't that naive, you know, we weren't going to build all those houses, those sports centres, do all the things that we did and get away with it. She was going to try and make lessons of us all. But there's a few interesting things. There was a lot of humour about as well, being Liverpool. But there was also, you know, sort of all the little things that we did. Like we started a social work, a Chinese social work. We found out that it was reported that an elderly Chinese man had died and they hadn't been seen for about 2 weeks. So we realised that there was a need there. So we actually created a social work, Chinese social work team that understood some of the languages, some of the dialects, and it's still going now. And I think that, you know, little things like that we pushed on. One of the things that we did as well is, it just shows the minute things, and one of the amusing things, I suppose, and it shows you how there's a council. I remember we were talking about, we used to get a meal, and it used to be quite a grand affair, didn't it? Oh, sorry, what's going on? Anyway, a long story, very short, we said, look, there's £2,000 for us, we're socialists. This is at the town hall during the meetings. At the interval, it used to be like our tea, basically. Someone said, well, let's have the meals the kids have, you know, school meals. There should be some left over. Have you ever tasted a school meal? 24 hours after it's been lying there. It was bloody awful. And then at the next meeting, I think someone jumped up and said, do you know about this meal? Maybe we're a bit hasty about that. So we decided to go back to the meals again. So there was humour, there was camaraderie. And one thing we needn't, as I say, to go back to the perfect storm again, that we must stick together as a left group. We must stick together. We're never going to be the same. We have different areas, we have different points of view in some things and other. But our main aim is socialism, and that's what we must stick to. Well, thank you anyway.
Thanks, Paul. Right, what I'm going to do is pass along the mic along the top table just to get a 30-second to a minute summing up, and hopefully then we can clear the room for the next session.
Just a comrade here, no one begrudges anyone remaining in the Labour Party. I'm not in it. I left when Tony Mullane was expelled. If there was no place for Tony Mullane, there was no place for me. That's how much I respected Tony. But I don't begrudge anyone like yourself, like other people in this room who are members of the Labour Party now and fighting for all the things that we would wish you to fight for. I'm sure you're doing that. I don't begrudge anyone that. What I want is debate. What I want is what we had in the 80s, which is discussion. That discussion is, should we remain in the Labour Party? It's what Ken Loach said. Ken Loach said when he was expelled and he was on YouTube and he went, look, I'm looking at it from my perspective. And my perspective now is I don't think there's a party out there at the moment that I can think of as being an overall cover for a workers' party. But I'm more than happy to discuss with all the groups and those that are left in the Labour Party about what the future should be. And that's where I am. But what I do, and Roger Silverman said it the other day as well on the Labour Left Alliance, fight and stay. Well, you might be able to stay, but if you fight, you get expelled. That's what's going on. And what you win today, will we have took office tomorrow? That's the debate. That's the discussion. That's what got to take place in this.
And I'm made up that those discussions are taking place. I just want to say one more thing. I didn't mention Bob Parry. He played a tremendous role. Sometimes you forget people. And you should mention Bob. And Jimmy Parry was brilliant. Tony Byrne was not a member of Militant. Frank Mills was not a member of Militant. They were good, broad left comrades. All I would say about the Labour Party, this is my own position, this is my opinion. I respect everyone else's opinion, but this is my opinion. If there's no place for Audrey White, if there's no place for John Dunn, who's a Clay Cross councillor, if there was no place for Tony Mullane, there'll never be a place for me.
Yeah, I quickly just want to answer that point as well about is it right to make that comparison between what Militant were trying to do within the Labour Party and what Marxists are trying to do today in the Labour Party. Now, the assessments that he refers to rightly at that time was that the Labour Party was a bourgeois workers' party, which means it was right-wing at the top, but it had a mass membership of working class people who were good potential activists. What the militant tendency did was they built that layer up. They looked at the Labour Party and seen that the Labour Party had democratic structures that you could use. You could get elected into positions. You could use those positions to build up a membership of working class people to fight for policies, to get those policies established. You could use the strength within the Labour Party to hold councillors and MPs to account, to make sure that they delivered on the manifestos that they were elected on, and if they didn't deliver on them, they could be removed by instant recall. If you're letting us down, we'll have a vote of no confidence, we'll have a debate, we'll have a vote, and you're off. And we'll get somebody who'll do the job. We've got somebody who's here, who's got a stomach for the fight. That's not the situation with the Labour Party now. There are no democratic structures in the Labour Party. They don't exist. I'll give you a little example. Been speaking with what's his name, Byrne, Ian Byrne. Ian Byrne is being, the right wing of the Labour Party are using the trigger ballot process to get rid of him. He tells me that at the Zoom meeting, they had a Zoom meeting that shouldn't have been a Zoom meeting because they've been having in-person meetings. The bureaucracy used that Zoom meeting to keep out people who were supporters of Ian Byrne, and they brought in people who they didn't even know, who weren't attending the meeting. No one knew them. The images weren't up on the screen, and they voted against Ian Byrne. And they're on the way to trying to get rid of a working class trades unionist. That's what they're doing. Now, if that was, I'll finish on this, if they tried that, if the left tried that to get rid of a right-wing MP, then the whole constituency would be suspended. Anybody involved would be suspended, expelled. That's the end of it. And that's the end of the Labour Party.
I was a member of Militant in the 80s, and I'm now a member of the Socialist Party, which is what it was. The thing is, I think if someone, I don't know what it's like now, but I was riding along in about 1990 on my bike in Speke, and the road opposite the airport, you could see where the regeneration stopped. There was half the road had the new fences and the improvements, and when we got surcharge, it stopped. And the other houses all had ramshackle fences and, overgrown privets. So you could actually see the difference from us and the new council.
Thanks, Harry. Right, just very briefly for the final two speakers. Audrey.
I think we've got to learn from our past. We're billing this as a learning experience, if you like, from the 1980s. And I think one of the things we were talking about, discussing with people, when we go on picket lines, we don't do what these wannabe councillors, these fake lefts, the soft left, the saboteurs, wherever you call them, have been doing over the last few years, where they go on a picket line and they stand there and they pose with their fist and they get themselves elected into some sort of salaried position. And I really saw the difference between what we have done in the past as socialists, When, for instance, I went to Park Road where they were closing down the post office. And all these people, the councillors, the Sarah Doyles of the world, and Louise Ellman, stood there actually with a live donkey, to be honest with you. I don't know what the bloody donkey had to do with it, but there was a donkey there. And they all had the photographs taken. And you know what? Nobody stood there and spoke to the people who were really worried about their post office closing. You find out what it means to these people. You ask them, well, what would happen to you? Where would you have to go? If this and you know what? You engage with them, and you know why you do it. You do it so as you can help them, so that you can argue the case, and that you show them that you understand, and you show them that you're going to put those arguments forward. So that's what the militant did. That didn't mean militant. That's what the ordinary people did. In the council, all of the politicos in the city, we discussed with people, did it with my dispute as well. That's what we learn. We approach the working class in a sympathetic, open and interested way, and we listen to what the real problems are so that we can solve them alongside of them.
I want to, in sort of winding up my contribution, I want to talk about the people who came after us. That when we were surcharged, there were another set of councillors who'd all agreed to keep to the District Labour Party rules, to have a no-cuts policy, to create jobs and continue the housing policy. They were the second 11. Now, that second 11 broke on the rocks of the poll tax. That half of them went for full-on support for people fighting the poll tax, and half of them caved in. But it is important to know that there were people there who came after us, who followed the same policies. Leslie was one of them, and it was basically because the District Labour Party wasn't working. The main political run was from the Women's Council, the Labour Women's Council. That role was really important. And I echo what people have said about we do honour the comrades who've died. It's an honour to have worked with Tony Byrne. It's an honour to have worked with Tony Mull. It's an honour to have worked with Paul's dad. There's all sorts of people that we were, privileged to know and privileged to work with. But we hope that we give Liverpool a legend to live up to, and we hope that the story. I know I can go anywhere in the country and someone will come up to me and go, I supported you in the 80s. We recognise that big level of support as well. So thank you, and let's learn from what we did. Everything we did, anything right, anything wrong. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fliss. Felicity's just made said a word there, which was hope. And I remember a photograph of some young girls outside Liverpool Town Hall. I'm not sure whether it was the student strike, or I think perhaps it might well have been a demonstration against the budget meeting in 1983 that was getting set by the Tories and the Liberals. But it's a black and white photograph, and I remember seeing it a long time ago, and I'd love to get a photocopy of it or a copy of it now. And those young girls were holding up a cardboard placard. We're doing all that today. We're making our own placards. And all it said on it was, all we need is hope. And that's what we as the Liverpool 47 tried to do. We tried to give people hope in getting a job, hope for a decent education, hope for a roof over their head. That was what we were about. We tried to give this city some hope and stand up for them against all the Tory cuts that we were having. I just want to say thanks to everybody for coming. Thanks today for your support. Thanks for your support over the last 30-odd years. Without you, as I say, going back in those days, we would never have been able to do what we did. Going back to something Paul said before, it's time we made a stand. It's time we made a stand again. Now, trade unions have been mentioned, the Labour Party's been mentioned. I certainly am not a member of the Labour Party anymore, but I didn't leave the Labour Party with the intention of going away. I'm going to try and campaign for change through my two trade unions. I'm a member of the CWU and a member of Unite, and I'll be campaigning for change and putting the pressure on these current councillors who have basically laid out a red carpet for the commissioners to come into this city. We've got to keep the pressure on them, and now it's time we made a stand. Thank you again for coming. Thanks for your support.